Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on your favorite football updates channel. It's a pleasure to be back with you on this beautiful Monday night, the 16th of March 2026. It's always a pleasure to be back with you, and it's a bit of a hot weather, or hot out there, or a hot night here in Kampala, Uganda, following a full day of full-blown sunshine, and we do appreciate it for what it is, because some days are colder than, so cold, then this one is a hot one, and yeah, we'll take it for simply for what it is. So tonight we'll be talking about the ban that Chelsea are facing, a transfer ban, and the fine that they've been handed in the wake of their indiscretions in as far as transfers are concerned. Then also we'll be talking about that topic that we left unattempted on in the morning, because we ended up in a full-blown debate about Arsenal. Not that it was intended to be that, but because of the audience that we had in the morning, the debate went on to raged on about Arsenal's style of play and things like that. And on that note, therefore, I wish to say thank you so much to all of you that were part of that morning discussion. People, I made Pedri, there's Moirali, I think. There's somebody else, I think, What Makes It Work, somebody like that name, or who went by that name. So for those of you that contributed to that morning discussion and debate, thank you so much for having been part of that. It's not a discussion that we are looking forward to continue. I see Pedro is trying to cause a stir in the comment section already, saying Arsenal are playing disgusting football. I hate their team. Nah, I'm joking. Joking, don't worry. Anyways, guys, I don't know if I would be reporting to you, but Pedri, in his idea of making the debate interesting, he decided that it was good to wake me up in the morning. But anyways, it was a fruitful debate or discussion that we did have. I always say we agree to disagree or disagree to agree, whichever way you want to put it. In as far as these discussions are concerned, for as long as they remain civil in terms of not exchanging insults, and we're just discussing ideas and perspectives of how we see different aspects of the game, then it's all good. The debate can rage on for as long as it can. But with that said, we'll be also debating that question that we left unattempted in the morning about whether Michael Carrick should be given the Manchester United job. And I'll be interested in hearing people from Pedri, even though he's not a Manchester United fan, his opinion does count for something, especially for us here, because he's one of our most usual suspects on the channel. So his opinion matters to us as a forum. So we'll be picking his mind on that. And then we'll also be trying to pick, guys, your mind about Chelsea's indiscretions and the kind of punishment they've been handed. Do you think it is consistent with the rules that they are at fault of breaking and things like that? So, and then, of course, later on, there's a game, or there are some games to be played tonight. Particularly, there's one in the Premier League between Brentford and Wolverhampton Wanderers, as a continuation of match day 30 from a weekend in which we saw very few goals being scored. I think there were about 12 goals scored in the weekend. So we had 3 goalless draws and things like that. So it wasn't the most exciting of weekends, depending on where you find yourself or otherwise. So, and things like that. Then in the Italian Serie A, the game between Cremonese and Fiorentina has kicked off. Fiorentina battling against relegation. I think they are 1 point above relegation. While in the Spanish La Liga, Rayo Vallecano are going to be up against Levante. So that's the action that will be ongoing. Then, of course, we will be looking forward to the UEFA Champions League action that does return tomorrow, in as far as the round of 16 second legs are concerned. So there's all that on our menu in as far as the discussion is concerned tonight. So for those of you that are just joining us, kindly like the broadcast, but also if it is your first time here, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much. And Please leave me a comment down in the comment section based on the topic or on the headline of the discussion and anything else in football that you'd want us to discuss. Pedri says, for me, jokes aside, I wouldn't want to play Arsenal if they play that way against me and kick me out from the UEFA Champions League semi-finals in that manner. I would be sad, but I know it is fair in the rules, so nothing wrong. Then you say, so yeah, they are abiding by the rules of football, so it's completely fine, but it's sad. It's a sad way for a team to lose. I completely understand where you're coming from, Pedri. So anyways, I will leave that at that. Let's kick off quickly with the Chelsea topic. So Chelsea have been handed a £10.75 million fine, £10 million, 750,000 fine for being found in breach of for being in breach of the financial rules that govern the Premier League, that govern UEFA competitions and things like that, or teams that play within UEFA. Then also, they've been given a 1-year ban on transfers. So that's the discussion. Now, first of all, how did we arrive to the Premier League handing Chelsea a £10.75 million fine? Now, this Chelsea are being penalized for their indiscretions, not for their current ownership or management in Tony Bolly and his partners. It's for a period between 2011 and 2018 when they were found to have flouted the financial rules in terms of reporting. Why? Because ordinarily, Premier League teams or teams are supposed to report their finances every single year to the FA and to the Premier League. And then, if those teams are participating in UEFA competitions, they do the same reporting to UEFA. Now, when Tony Bolly and his partners acquired Chelsea in 2022, through their background checks and thorough investigations of going through the Chelsea books with a fine-tooth comb, they came across certain transactions from the club to offshore accounts or offshore companies that were questionable. And then they self-reported to UEFA. Now, in 2023, Chelsea and UEFA came to a settlement or came to an agreement that ended up with Chelsea being fined 10 million euros. Now, the fine came in the form of an agreed settlement after the discussions. And the reason as to why there was not further penalty for Chelsea for that is because they had self-reported about the matter. Like I said, it's the new administration sort of reporting Romano Abramovich's former administration, because these are indiscretions that happened between 2011 and 2018. And in these payments, what we are being told is that Chelsea made payments related to transfers to offshore companies or accounts. Now, usually, ordinarily, this is how transfers go about. Club A is interested in a player from Club B. Let's say, since we have a Barcelona fan on the forum, allow me to use Barcelona. Barcelona are interested, let's say, in signing Marcus Rashford from Manchester United. So Barcelona will approach intermediaries, usually players' agents, to say, we have interest in your player. Do you think he would be open joining us? And then if the player has any form of interest whatsoever, then Barcelona will be informed that Marcus Rashford will be open to joining Barcelona. And once discussions are had at that level, they can go to the extent of probing of how much do you think salary would it be? And in terms of, some little bit of contract figures in terms of salary. And what salary is he on at Manchester United and things like that. So they would get an understanding of what the situation is with Marcus Rashford at the club through intermediaries. And then once they ascertain that the player will be open to joining them, they would then formally approach Manchester United to say, we are interested in your player, Marcus Rashford. And then negotiations go on. Now, depending on how negotiations conclude, usually they will conclude in Barcelona agreeing to pay a certain fee to Manchester United for the transfer of the player. But also in those discussions, there's what we call agent fees. Now, sometimes agent fees is a percentage of the fine of the transfer fee that is paid by Manchester United to um, to Marcus Rashford's agents. Or alternatively, Barcelona would agree with the agent to pay him a certain amount of the fee or a certain fee for his player to transfer to Barcelona without necessarily Manchester United being the ones paying that agent fees or that transfer fee. Sorry, the agent fees. So those are some of the kinds of negotiations or things that are involved in a transfer deal. Now, sometimes you have transfers that first of all, are negotiated in a bit of a skewed manner other than that straightforward manner. And by that, what do I mean? So, for example, let's say Chelsea, in buying a player, is going to record and say, we are buying a player like, let's say, William Borges de Silva for, let's say, £40 million. And then they will show that out of the £40 million, they paid an extra £2 million, let's say, to agents for agent fees, and maybe they paid the player an extra £1 million fee in a sign-on fee. Now, usually or ordinarily, sign-on fees, because negotiations vary. They vary with the caliber of player. So, for example, if you're signing a player like, let's say, present day, let's say Barcelona was signing a player like, let's say, Kylian Mbappe from Real Madrid. Just an assumption, guys. Do not get worked about this. Because of Kylian Mbappe's profile, even though Barcelona would be paying Real Madrid a fee for his transfer, the player can negotiate that he also gets a sign-on fee because there is a commercial value attached to his name, to his brand as a player, which is big. So then there could be also a certain fee that goes to the player in the form of sign-on fees. But usually sign-on fees are very common when players are moving for free. So, for example, Kylian Mbappe's free transfer from PSG to Real Madrid attracted a very significant fee for Kylian Mbappe as a player because in his negotiations, he's telling Real Madrid, look, ordinarily it would cost you maybe £200 million or 180 or 150 million pounds to sign me from PSG to come to the club. But now that I'm joining as a free agent, then you're going to give me £80 million or you're going to pay me £100 million for me to join. And they would, of course, go on to negotiate a structure in which those payments are made. Now, so usually in a transparent manner or a straightforward manner, that's how those things will be handled. However, sometimes, particularly, for example, in the wake of Chelsea's dealings, and I don't mean to say that it's only Chelsea that do these kinds of things. You remember Barcelona's transfer from Neymar was questioned. Pedri says Chelsea, if they find they do not matter Todibodi when he speaks, he spits dollars in terms of the transfer market. It is so good because I think Chelsea need stability and stop the bulk buying. Well, we're going to find out more about that. You say they need to form a team chemistry, just like Barcelona. We add one player every season or something. That wouldn't actually help us, but Chelsea nearly changed an entire lineup each season. Like, what team does that? Pedri there is questioning perhaps Chelsea's squad building and overall transfer policy. We know what has happened with Chelsea over the last 3 years or coming on to 4 years when it comes to transfers, how many players they've bought and how many players they've channeled out and things like that. Never mind that a good number of them have not worked out while some have worked out. So, in other words, for Chelsea, in this particular case, I would want to believe that if, for example, they agreed to pay, let's say, £40 million for a player X, let's use the example of William Borges de Silva, and then agreed to pay his agent maybe £2 million and maybe pay William Borges de Silva £1 million in transfer fees. They went on, that is what they went on to report to the authorities. And yet, ordinarily, they may have agreed, let's say, to pay the agent £4 million and not just 2. Because usually, these payments that clubs make attract a certain tax, either on the receiving end of whoever they are paying or from them as an entity, in terms of expenditures. So I won't speak to you about the particulars of the tax policies of how they work in different countries because I'm not privy to that information, nor am I a tax person. But usually there's that element of taxes. That's why oftentimes you'll hear these players getting exorbitant wages. But depending on what country they play in, those wages could end up being slashed. I'll give you an example. I think in the UK, it's anywhere between 45 to maybe 47.5% for tax deductions on foreign players. So in other words, if you're earning 100K, that means about 45,000 is going to taxes or a fee in that region. So that is if you earn 100K before taxation. So, and things like that. So even with transfer dealings, there are taxes involved. So maybe to evade taxes or to gain an advantage in transfers, because sometimes a club will commit to pay higher agent fees to get an advantage over another competing club that are competing for the same player. So there's also that element. In other words, if let's say if both Chelsea, as was the case, want to sign Eden Hazard, and if they both want to sign Eden Hazard, Chelsea would, let's say, maybe agree because Eden Hazard joined Chelsea from Lille back in 2012, and at the time, Arsenal were also interested in his signature. Chelsea would, for example, commit to paying his agent, let's say £4 million, while Arsenal reluctant to pay that much. But then in the reporting of the figures, they will tell the authorities that, oh, no, we paid the agent £2 million, and then go through their back doors and then pay an extra £2 million in offshore accounts to complete or to aid the transfer of Eden Hazard and things like that. So those are some of the improprieties that Chelsea were found guilty of. And it is believed that about 6 transactions of that nature happened to offshore accounts. But like I said, it's upon the discovery of those secret transactions that Chelsea's new owners, in Tony Bolly and his partners, self-reported to the Premier League and the FA as well as UEFA. So in 2023, UEFA fined them, or they agreed with UEFA for a settlement of about 10 million euros, which Chelsea are paid. Now, of course, even when they self-reported to these authorities, even the authorities went on to do their checks, to do their own investigations. That's why for the FA and the Premier League, it's taken that long to come up with their penalties as opposed or as compared to UEFA. So today, Chelsea have been handed a 10.75 £1 million fine for those breaches, and then they'll be handed a 1-year ban on transfers. However, that ban is suspended for 2 years. Now, I've been here before and explained to you how a suspended ban or penalty works. I'll give you an example. If let's say, yes, and I remember we're talking about the Harry Maguire case for when he was found guilty of attempting to bribe a police officer or a security officer and a couple of other indiscretions during his trip to Greece. He was given a 15 months jail sentence, but it is a suspended sentence. In other words, he does not go actively to jail. However, usually that suspended sentence is given for within a particular period of time. So let's say if you're handed a 1-year sentence, it could be suspended for 6 months, a year or 2. And what that means that should you be found breaking the law in any manner whatsoever within that period, then you'll go behind bars for the suspended sentence, and then perhaps subsequently for the actual new offense that you may have committed. So in this particular case, Chelsea have been handed a 1-year transfer ban, but that 1-year transfer ban has been suspended for 2 years. In other words, within the next 2 years, should Chelsea find themselves in breach of any of the financial rules, of the Premier League, then that ban will come into effect and be actively implemented. So that's the deal with Chelsea. But also, in addition to those penalties, Chelsea have been handed, now, out of the £10.7 million, 10 of that is for Chelsea's transfer dealings on senior players or first team players, whereas the £750,000 is for transfers related to academy players. And this is not the first time, by the Chelsea are being caught up in the mix of these transfer indiscretions. Not too long ago, they were ordered to pay, I think, about £2 million to Liverpool for the transfer of Rion Gomoha by an independent transfer committee. And then they are expected to pay a further £4.8 million in achievable add-ons and a future, I think, 20% sell-on clause or on profit that they may get from the sale of that player. So sorry, it's not just that we're in the mix of that, but Liverpool were, at the receiving end of that. But Chelsea themselves have been at the end of such things. So then they also have a suspension, a 9 months academy transfer ban. Now, I am not privy or sure whether even the 9 months academy transfer ban is also suspended. That I'm yet to ascertain. But from what I gather, this 9 months may be actively implemented. So Chelsea may not be able to sign young players to the academy for a period of 9 months for those indiscretions. So that's what is come out of Chelsea in regards to their club and in the wake of things that happened in the Roman Abramovich era. So Chelsea will be paying that penalty, and possibly, I do not know how, if they do not find themselves at the wrong end of the law, then they will, that sentence, that 1 year ban, transfer ban, will remain suspended. Anyways, allow us move away from the Chelsea conversation from that. But Pedro touched about how many players they sign and how it feels like they are signing a whole starting 11 in every transfer window, and particularly the summer transfer window. And in recent times, to be fair, they've been more focused on outgoings than incomings. And that's how players like Joao Felix, Raheem Sterling, players like Axel Disasi who left on loan to West Ham, have all left the club. Players like George Petrovic, who left the club to join AFC Bournemouth. Players like there's Ian Matson left for Aston Villa. Players like Armando Brocha went to Burnley. I thought Burnley were scammed in that transfer deal because for me, it did not. It's a transfer that never made sense. How do you explain paying £20 million of a player who has not scored a Premier League goal in 2 years, in 2 seasons? Really, make it sense. And I do not think there's any surprises whatsoever for Burnley having a player that cannot score goals, So there's that. And then, of course, players like Kanare Chukwuemeka have left to join, had left to join Borussia Dortmund. Players like Leslie Ugochukwu left and joined Burnley. So there's been quite a number of those players that have left Chelsea in recent times to join other clubs as Chelsea worked on their outgoings. And I think Noni Madueke are leaving to join Arsenal. Who else? There's another Chelsea player that I feel joined Arsenal. Yes, Kepa Arrizabalaga, and things like that. So that's been the kind of thing. So you can see that there's been a lot of outgoings, but also there are incomings. For example, they are waiting for Jovan Quenda to join them. Meanwhile, the game between Brentford and Wolverhampton Wanderers has already kicked off. It's in around the 7th minute there, and it's still goalless. So we'll be keeping tabs on that action as it continues. So, but those are Chelsea's indiscretions in as far as things go. So Moving on, let's move on to the topic that we were unable to fulfill or to tackle in the morning, and that's regarding Manchester United. Should Michael Carrick be given the Manchester United job? We all know that the 44-year-old England gaffer is at Manchester United as an interim head coach until the end of the season. Now, it's a discussion that we have had before, although the context was a bit different. In the discussion that we've had on this channel thus far was pertaining to do with what type of manager do Manchester United need. And for those of you that are not privy to that conversation, please go over to the channel. Under the video section, you'll find that video that discusses what type of manager do Manchester United need. And in that video, I went on to make the argument that Manchester United need to tell us what kind of direction they want to take as a club. So, and we go on to answer different questions. Now, Michael Carrick has been in charge of Manchester United for 9 Premier League games now. He's won 7 of those. He's lost 1 and drawn the other. The draw coming against West Ham, while the loss came against Newcastle by 2-1, while victories have come against teams like Aston Villa, who they beat this weekend by 3-1, thanks to goals by Casemiro, Matthias Cunha, and Benjamin Sesko, while Ross Barkley's squad what turned out to be a mere consolation for Aston Villa. Then they beat up against teams like Man United, teams like Arsenal, teams like Fulham, teams like Tottenham Hotspurs, in the running to those victories that they have recorded on their paper, as well as Everton being the other team that they managed to beat by 1-0. So, in other words, when you look at Michael Carrick's report card in this interim period, he's done tremendously well. He did join Manchester United when they had about, I think, when they were about 7th on the Premier League log, and today they are 3rd on the same table. 7 points adrift of a second-placed Manchester City, who themselves are 9 with a game in hand, adrift of the top Arsenal, and that kind of thing. They have a 3-point advantage over their top 4 rivals in Aston Villa, and then I think for Chelsea, in the wake of their defeat against Newcastle, I think those points could be about 6, while same applies, those points are about 5 for Liverpool, because Liverpool are 5th, 6th for Chelsea, 6 points for Chelsea, and things like that. So they put themselves in a very healthy position in as far as their pursuit for UEFA Champions League football is concerned next week. And that's all credit to Michael Carrick. But essentially, what has Michael Carrick done in terms of putting Manchester United in the kind of position that they are in today? I, for one, and in this, I say in disagreement of Ashley Young. While Ashley Young makes the case that because he was speaking to Sky Sports, I think yesterday or the other day, he's of the argument, first of all, that Michael Carrick be given the job if they finish 3rd. But he also goes on to say that he's done tremendously well, and yet he's not had the time to work with this team about tactics on the training ground. I couldn't disagree. That's just a blatant lie. It is true that Michael Carrick did not have sufficient time to work on tactics when they beat up against Manchester City and subsequently Arsenal, that he had very few days to work within that. But ever since then, Man United have literally had 1 game to play every weekend, every other week. So just before they played Aston Villa, they had about, I think, 11 days, almost, maybe even 12. That's the span of an international break. So you cannot tell me he's not had the time to work on tactics. Going into the match international break, because now they played on Sunday, he has Monday to Thursday for them to work on their tactics ahead of their game against Bournemouth on Friday night. Hi, Isabella Martin. Good to have you back on the channel. Always a pleasure to see you around. Do us the usual honors and like the broadcast. Thank you so much. So, when we go for the match international break, Man United have a period of more than 3 weeks. I think it's close on to 23 days until they play their next fixture. Why? Because in the immediate aftermath of the international break. Hi, John. Good to have you back. In the aftermath of the international break, the first weekend in the Premier League will be dedicated to the quarterfinals of the FA Cup, for which Chelsea will be at home against Port Vale. Arsenal will be playing away to Southampton. I think those games will come on a Saturday. Manchester City will be up against Liverpool, while the other game is between West Ham and Leeds. So, in other words, even when we return from the international break, they'll have an entire week until they play the subsequent week, not even weekend, the subsequent week later, because they won't play the weekend, but they will play on Monday Night Football. So that is all time for him to work on his tactics and everything. So I believe for an interim manager and for a manager that is hard to guide his team through only one single competition, that argument does not stand. I'd make a case that if our marking managers, realist, Liam Moore Sr. has lost now, I think 6 games in charge of Chelsea, losing thrice to Arsenal, losing to PSG, losing to Newcastle, and then the other lost game against what? Oh, I think he's lost 5. I think those are his losses. I'd make a case that he has done better than Michael Carrick, in my opinion. However, to Michael Carrick's defense, you can only play the hand you've been dealt with. So the hand he's been dealt with is to guide a team that is only playing in the Premier League, and that's not his fault. But the reason that's why I would put Liam Moore Sr. above him is that he came into Chelsea's realms at around the same time that Michael Carrick takes charge of Manchester United. And once he did, he's had the least amount of time to work with his players in terms of tactics and how he wants them to behave. I stand to be corrected. I think he's had only 1 week where he's had not had a midweek game. Because once he came, he had Premier League, they had Champions League football, they had EFL Cup games to play, they are in the FA Cup games. In other words, they were still competing in 4 different competitions. Of course, they bow out of one, and that's the EFL Cup at the semi-finals over 2 legs. So I want to give him more credit because for a new manager taking over, and for him he's a permanent manager, taking over a team like Chelsea, and you have to prepare your team across 4 different competitions where you have very little time to drill your players into certain tactics and the way you want them to play can be a very difficult task. And that's where I would give him more credit above Michael Carrick. But like I said, to Michael Carrick's defense, he can only play the hand he's been dealt with, and that's true. So in terms of performance, Michael Carrick, you'd give him an A for thus far how he's handled Manchester United. Tactically, like I said, I do not think he's changed much. He simply reverted back to the basics. And what are the basics? Man United are known for playing counter-attacking football. He's gone to that. He's played the right players in the right positions. Play a right back in a right back position, play Luke Shaw in his left back, play with 2 centre backs, go with a double pivot of a number 6 and a number 8 in Casemiro and Kobe Mainoo, play Bruno Fernandes in a number 10 where he's more effective, and the rest is almost obvious. 2, he's brought back a bit of joy and confidence in that dressing room of Man United. We all know that when a team is not winning games, when they're not performing well, usually confidence and moods are very low within the dressing room. And that's just the nature of it. It's just the nature of sport. It's just the nature of competition. That when you're not performing well, your confidence is low. The mood in the camp is bound to be low. It's just as simple as that. You know? So he's uplifted that. But also, he's had the buy-in from these players. And these players seem to like him. And according to Roy Keane, he says, usually or more often than not, players love interim managers because they know it's a temporary thing. He's not going to be involved in their contract talks and what not. So they tend to like them. And things like that. Whereas that is true, I'd want to think that he deserves the credit that he gets for those things. So it's a very good thing for a team or for a camp, for a squad, for a dressing room, for players to like their managers. It does help. Now, the question is, can Michael Carrick handle the pressure and the responsibility of being a Manchester United head coach? And those responsibilities are oftentimes many or bigger. In this particular case, if you're head coach or manager, depending on what title you have been given, you'll be involved in more activities than one. For example, if you're Michael Carrick, eventually you're going to be involved in transfer dealings. You're going to be involved in some form or respect in contract renewal discussions with certain players, and maybe demanding the club that keeps certain players that you'd want, while that they for themselves may think are players that should be let go of, and things like that. So your responsibilities become bigger. But more importantly, should Manchester United qualify for the UEFA Champions League, as does look to be the destiny, that they are destined for that, there's also, you're now going to be commanding the team across multiple competitions. In other words, you're going to take them through the Champions League, having responsibilities in the Premier League, eventually the FA Cup when January approaches, and then the EFL Cup, that is, I think, around September or something, and all that. So your responsibilities become more, and that comes with lots of expectations and pressures and more work to do. At the moment, his focus, like I said, although not his fault, is solely on the Premier League. In other words, every single week he's had one game. In fact, Man United have 3 games to play in a space of 6 weeks. One is the game that they've just played against Aston Villa. The next is going to be against Bournemouth, and the one after the international break. So I do not think that there is a team the size of Manchester United in recent times that has had that kind of fixture schedule. If you give Pep Guardiola that kind of fixture schedule, I think he would be winning every game. Nothing is guaranteed, anyways. But I think it would help him compete better. So look at what is happening with Manchester City, with all the responsibilities that Pep Guardiola has. But more importantly, no matter how good a squad they have that you think of them, look at how they've had certain struggles in certain moments of the season. Why? Because they played the previous weekend, and that was in the FA Cup at home against Newcastle, went away in the UEFA Champions League and played Real Madrid, came back in the weekend and played West Ham, and they have to host Real Madrid, on Wednesday. So that's how thick and fast fixtures come at you if you Pep Guardiola. And I do suspect that that's how thick and fast they will be coming. Wow. Michael Carrick with a brilliant goal to put Brentford in the lead. And that's his first goal. for Michael Carrick. Beautiful cross. He rises the highest and puts his head to it. It's 1-0 to Brentford. Meanwhile, Fiorentina are leading against Cremonese by 2-0. Remember, Fiorentina are in the battle against relegation over there. But it's a beautiful, beautiful goal that he scored, especially for a right back. When it's not set piece play, how quickly he finds himself in the box. And he's managed to stay on side, made the brilliant run, and connected that ball really, really well. And Jose Sa was nowhere near it. In fact, he barely made any movement towards the ball. So that's how quality the goal is. So, anyways, back to Man United. So, whether you think that Man United should give him the job, those are some of the other factors or some of the things that you ought to think about if you are an advocate that Michael Carrick be handed the Manchester United job. It's not an easy job. It's not an easy job. It's a big, big job. We know it's big responsibility. I, for one, first of all, my view or my stand on whether he should be given the job is dependent on certain conditions or situations. And for me, they all revolve around the kind of direction that Manchester United would want to take. If Man United want to build a project that goes on to dominate English football and perhaps European football for a bit of time, I'm of the view that they should go with a more experienced manager, a manager that is very good tactically, or perhaps you could say, as I often define it, obsessed with the tactics of the game. A manager like Luis Enrique, Xabi Alonso, Enzo Maresca, Xavi Hernandez, possibly those kinds of managers. Julian Nagelsmann, a Mauricio Pochettino, I do not know. A Thomas Tuchel, those kinds of managers. They go on to build their own projects. Even though we oftentimes make reference to the Arsenal project, I know for a fact that the Arsenal project is yet to win anything. Theirs may not take that long. But go back to the Manchester City project. It took, I think, about 4 years before they won their first Premier League title in 2012. And ever since then, they've not looked back because they've gone on to upgrade that project from one step to another. And how that has gone about is they won the Premier League title in 2012. They missed it for one season in 2013 and won it again in 2014. After that, Chelsea won it in 2015, Crystal Palace in 2016, not Crystal Palace, Leicester City in 2016, and Chelsea again in 2017. But Chelsea, to also win it, they had spent time building it because they had not won it since 2010. So the first time they win it again under Jose Mourinho, after building a new project, was in 2015. And that's why Antonio Conte is able to win it with them in 2017. And then Man City win in 2018, 2019, skip 2020, and win it between 2021 until 2023. That's for 4 consecutive years, 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. So that's how projects work. So in other words, they take time to build. If Man United on the other side are of the view that they need quick success, and as is their objective, to win the Premier League title for the 2027-2028 Premier League season, then I'm of the view that they stick with Michael Carrick. One, first of all, he's not overly obsessed with tactics. It's not that he doesn't know them or doesn't have them. He's the kind of manager that is an easy go about, that is more about managing player relationships and managing egos and things like that. Bringing calm to a storm, kind of. Ancelotti kind of guy. Zinedine Zidane kind of manager. It's not that they do not, they know the tactics and they know about that. They just do not obsess over them. They're the kind of managers that are bound to overlook a player's indiscretion and focus perhaps on what you'd call the bigger picture or on the issue at hand or the game at hand. So, for example, if you're Carlo Ancelotti, you're not going to be worked up by Vinicius Jr. reporting late to training, as a Pep Guardiola would be worked up about Bernardo Silva coming late to training and eventually penalizing him or bringing up an uproar. You'd be thinking, yeah, look here, mate, do not come late. We have a game to play. I need you switched on. I need you to know that, your focus is where it needs to be, because you are going to win us this game and things like that. So I think if that is the objective, or that remains the objective, to win the Premier League title in 2028, then they are better off keeping Michael Carrick. Because in Michael Carrick, one, you have somebody that is familiar with the workings of the club. It doesn't mean that the job will be easy, but it does help simplify the job in some form or shape. Understanding the culture of the club, knowing what the club is about, and things like that. So, in other words, they would use next season to further build the squad that they have been building ever since Erik ten Hag was brought in charge of the club. And you can see the kinds of players that they brought in ever since then. Some have worked out, some haven't. Particularly this summer, their responsibilities will be around building their midfield. And the demand for Michael Carrick was to get the team to actually compete for the Premier League title. They may not eventually win it, but they need to be serious competitors in that team. And at the end of the season, they will assess what the missing pieces of the puzzle could be to help them get it over the line. You remember how Manchester United competed for the Premier League title in 2012? Manchester City won that on goal difference. Man United have been the reigning champions from 2011. So Sir Alex Ferguson figured, if I need to win the Premier League title next season, I need a striker. And he went out to Arsenal and got Robin van Persie. They won the title the subsequent season, 2013. That kind of thing. You identify, first of all, you compete, and then identify what the difference was in you missing out on the Premier League title. They may not even come second. They could come third or even fourth. But they must be not too far away from the eventual champion. So do not finish fourth and you're 20 points away from the eventual Premier League title winner. No. Do not be third and you're 20 points away from them. Be third and you're 8 points behind the eventual winners. That's a catchable figure in terms of closing the gap on those points the subsequent season. So then, when that season 2027-2028 comes, he would have had a full season and a half to work with this group of players in terms of building towards that objective, achieving that objective. So, depending on what direction they want to take, that's for me what determines on whether they should stick with Michael Carrick or whether they should give him the job permanently or they should venture out and look for a more experienced manager. Let's be honest. Michael Carrick is not the most experienced of managers that you have out there on the market. In terms of pedigree, Xabi Alonso has a bigger CV than his. You will argue Enzo Maresca is held in the same regard. Some people hold FC Bournemouth's Andoni Iraola even in bigger respect than they do Michael Carrick. Managers like Oliver Glasner, and I'm not saying they're the most ideal candidates for the job. I'm simply saying they are all better than Michael Carrick. Let's say the World Cup ends and England have reached the finals of the World Cup, or they have won it, or they have not even won it, or otherwise, and Thomas Tuchel decides, yes, I know I just signed a new long contract with the England national team, but I would want out because I believe there's a bigger job for me out there. United could come calling. Unless it goes sideways for England and they are knocked out maybe at the round of 16, then Thomas Tuchel's reputation will have question marks over it. You look at Carlo Ancelotti. Now, that goes back to what type of manager would Man United need? For a manager of his experience, he's a figure that you can trust. If he does well with the Brazilian national team and decides, yeah, it's time for me to walk away, and perhaps doing well with the Brazilian national team is subjective, but for me, if Brazil go as far as the quarterfinals of the World Cup, I'll say that's fairly well, because first of all, I do not expect Brazil to win it. Not because I do not trust our head coach in Carlo Ancelotti, but because I do not think our squad is good enough. That's just about it, you know? So really, Man United have some questions to answer before we decide whether Michael Carrick should be given the job or it should be handed to somebody else. We need to know what their stance is, what their objectives are, and how they want to go about it. Do they want to build a team that goes on to be dominant? And by the way, in building a squad or a team, it doesn't mean that you do not win entirely. You could pick some silverware here and there, but the overall objective, the overall grand scheme of things. When Mikel Arteta joined Arsenal, he gave his bosses a 5-year project. And that's why in his 50th full season, having celebrated his 6th anniversary in December, that's why they are demanding him of the silverware. That's why there's an overall expectation, not just among the Arsenal fan base, but all well-wishers, the neutrals, and even those that hate them, that this must be the season that he wins something or else he walks. When Arsenal competed for the Premier League title in 2022-2023, they were just ahead of the curve. Even when they competed and fell short for finishing within the top 4 in the 2021-2022 season, it was just the project growing at a significantly faster pace than he or they had earlier anticipated. And they've had to work with that. And that's why, even when they finished second on two consecutive occasions, 2023 and 2024, it was not a make or break season for Mikel Arteta last season, because it was still part of the process, part of his project building. Meanwhile, it's 2-0 for Brentford against Wolverhampton Wanderers. Igor Thiago has scored his 19th goal of the Premier League season. Beautiful, beautiful goal. This Wolverhampton Wanderers side that came into this fixture on the back of 2 consecutive victories against Aston Villa and Liverpool in the Premier League is getting quite the beating at the GTEC Stadium there. So but the donkey's work was done by Dango Ouattara. The question is, was he onside? He does appear to be onside. Dango Ouattara. And he provides the perfect assist for Igor Thiago as he scores his 19th goal of the Premier League season. He's been quite incredible. However, I'm not yet too sold about him, Igor Thiago. I'll wait to be proved that he's not just a one-season wonder. And I'm hoping, against hope perhaps, that Premier League clubs do not rush in for his signature just because he's had a brilliant season. But take nothing away from him. He's deserved everything he's gotten. So they lead by 2-0 there. Keith Andrews' side against this relegation in waiting side of Wolverhampton Wanderers. You watch them against this Brentford side and wonder how they even beat up against Aston Villa, how they even beat up against Liverpool, and how they forced Arsenal into that 2-2 draw. So anyway, that's the nature of football. It sort of goes oftentimes in the very unexpected way. It catches you off guard. You'll be beaten by a team that is not that good, but you will lose to them anyway. So regardless of what your view is. So anyways, guys, we'll leave the discussion about Manchester United at that. Chances are we'll do a video about it. I'm really considering doing a video about it quite very soon. So we'll have to wait and see. In the coming days, I was thinking maybe I wait for Man United to first go through that Bournemouth game, and then we do it over the international break or during the international break. So those are some of the considerations I'm having, because whereas it's all good, 9 games is still a sample space too small to draw to full-blown conclusions in that discussion. But I've given you the context in which the discussion should be happening before we come to that conclusion. So anyways, moving on. UEFA Champions League does return. And this midweek, we have actions coming your way on Tuesday and on Wednesday, respectively. So the one thing you ought to remember is that all teams that played last week on Wednesday have to play this week on Tuesday. And the reverse is true. And therefore, on Tuesday, the early kickoff is going to be between Sporting CP or Sporting Lisbon against Bodo Glimt. Remember, Bodo Glimt beat up against Sporting by 3-0 in the first leg. And that game will come at 8:45 p.m. Then at 11 p.m., we'll have 3 games. And I have to watch all of them. The other time, even though I watched all of them, I was lucky that the Arsenal game had come in the early kickoff. So my attention on the Bodo Glimt game wasn't as my attention on the Madrid and Chelsea game wasn't so divided, because the Bodo Glimt game has just passively watching, catching, major incidents there. Meanwhile, Igor Thiago has just had an attempt hit the upright. It was a header. Jose Sa had already been beaten, but it went off the woodwork and out. Anyways, so Chelsea up against PSG at Stamford Bridge will come at 11 p.m. Manchester City against Real Madrid. Pep Guardiola said that if there's any player that does not believe that it is possible, that a comeback is possible, then they should stay away. Then Arsenal will be at home against Bayer Leverkusen. So those games will kick off at 11 p.m. East African time tomorrow. We'll do the previews in the morning. And then on Wednesday, in the early kickoff, Barcelona will be at home against Newcastle. That's a very good thing that Barcelona come in the early kickoff. Then in the late kickoff at 11 p.m., Liverpool will be at home against Galatasaray. Bayern Munich, who apparently do not have any goalkeeper because all their goalkeepers are out through injury. And speculation has it that Harry Kane could start in goal, will be at home against Atlanta. Remember, Bayern Munich have a 6-1 lead in that going into that one. Then Tottenham Hotspurs, who lost by 5-2 against Atletico de Madrid in the first leg, will also be at home at 11 p.m. So those are the games that will be coming your way between Tuesday and Wednesday for the second legs of the round of 16. Like I said, we'll do those previews tomorrow morning. Be sure to be part of the discussion starting at around 9:30 a.m. or there are 9 about. Just turn on your notifications and you'll be notified as soon as we go live. And then we'll be doing the preview for the Tuesday games. And at least, the preview for the Tuesday games. And then the ones for Wednesday, we'll do that in the Wednesday morning broadcast. Or depending on how time may allow us with that discussion. So I wish to say thank you, John. Thank you so much, Isabella Martin. Thank you so much, Pedri, and every single one of you that has been part of tonight's broadcast. Oh, what a goal. What a goal. Wolverhampton Wanderers pulled one back through Armstrong. Wow, that was beautifully taken. That was beautifully taken. As beautiful as a goal you will see come in the Premier League. Wow. Oh. Wow. What a strike. The way he takes his fast touch to get past the Brentford defender, then sets himself up to beat Kelleher. It was just beautiful to watch. Looks like, and that goal has come at the right time, just shortly before halftime. And Aaron Armstrong has given Wolverhampton Wanderers perhaps reason to believe if they do not concede before halftime. So it's something that oh, come on. You know, it's when you're 2 goals down, it's very good when you score before halftime. It gives you that bit of belief that a comeback is possibly on, and that if all goes well, you can actually win it. You know, so that's if you do well enough to stay in the game. Because once you return for the second half, the one thing you want to do is avoid conceding an early goal, you know. So for as long as you can avoid that, it can be a very encouraging thing. It can be a very encouraging thing. So let's wait and see how they will behave for the remainder of this game. Otherwise, we will not do the rest of the watch along. But be sure I'll keep watching this Wolverhampton Wanderers game while keeping tabs on the game between Cremonese and Fiorentina that is currently at halftime. Actually, they are almost back, or they are on their way back for the second. They are back for the second half is almost getting underway. So allow me wish you a blessed night, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye bye for now. Thank you.